bought me a Rode arm. Yeah, I'm still using the box, but yeah, that was the aim, but I just haven't quite moved in properly yet. I like them. Thank you for introducing. Yeah, thank you for introducing it to me. I signed up to something in Soho House, West Hollywood tonight, but I'm on the waitlist, which means I won't get on it. But it's about podcasting. It's run by podcaster, and then they've got a panel of like 4 or 5 other people who podcast in LA. Yeah, but I don't really look at the stuff very often. Actually, I should double check later whether I've got on the actually moved up the waitlist. But I thought that would be really interesting. Basically, the title was something like, "Do we need another podcast in LA?" But you've done it for you. Yeah, but the other thing is people don't sustain it. So there's a massive stat on the fact that most people don't get over 50 podcasts. And then I also read a stat the other day that says the average podcast is only downloaded 35 times per episode. Wow. Yeah, and what's weird is, I don't think my audience is massive, but when I was collecting data for, I can't remember, for something, I, I went through and looked at which countries it's listened to, and it's listened to 50 countries. It's really crazy. You think, wow, people in 50 different places in the world are listening. That's so cool. That's... I've got listeners in Japan. I don't have any in Cuba, I don't think. I had a simple cast, and I keep meaning to change it, and then I don't. Yeah, that simple cast does that. And then if you go on last 6 weeks, last year, and the sort of things get bigger and bigger, it's like, oh, I like that. Yay! Anyway, we are. And to be honest, I've forgotten. And then last night I couldn't get to sleep, and I was like, oh, we're going to post it on Dot to Dot as well. And because you helped me with Dot to Dot, you helped me make it work. Except I don't always follow through with stuff like using my red microphone. But I am today, so that's okay. But it's interesting because people will say that mentoring is more about sharing expertise and skills, but I don't actually agree with that. Um, when you see mentoring done with kids, for example, you're not really sharing explicit skills about this is how you do this job. You're exploring things with them. That's how you should do it. So in my view, which some people may argue is not the correct view, I think mentoring is about exploration and it's about space to talk. You may come with goals, you may not. Coaching is actually the one that's far more structured because you'd say, right, here are your goals. Here's how we break it down. These are the time periods we're checking in at. Now, having said that, on the app we do have all the psychological mechanisms underneath goals, so if people do want to set goals, it's all there to help them. But I think the thing that I see is the 2 biggest mistakes is people coming as mentors or not coming as mentors because they say, well, I don't have enough expertise. You don't need expertise. You need to be human. And you need to provide space for that person to talk and to think. And the other thing is that the person being mentored thinks they have to come along with a list of goals. And sometimes they will come along with a list of goals, but a good mentor will sort of explore them, and they're not actually what they want to do. Because mentoring should be about giving the space to find out what really matters to that person. Yeah, and I think, again, it depends on what somebody's told and how they've been trained. I don't... I think training is really helpful for mentoring and coaching, but I think a lot of that should be around doing things that might seem really obvious. So how do you listen? How do you actually hear what that person's saying? How do you help them understand what they're saying? Reflect it back to them. How do you help take it apart and put it back together in a way that makes more sense to them? And those things, on the one hand, take a huge amount of skill, but on the other hand, it's about being human. But we lose track of how to be human because we're so busy. Definitely. I think that's one of the things I've struggled with because I tell people about the app, which we'll talk about, and I say mentoring, and people have a very fixed view on what mentoring is. And I struggled with that for a bit because I was like, but it's not that. It's not that. And then I thought, actually, that's the role that we have to play, is creating a brand that doesn't actually exist necessarily at the moment, that says mentoring encompasses all of these different things. And we know it does. I mean, we know we use it for young people. We use it for people who are trying to get on their feet after being in prison. We use it like doctors. It is how they learn all of the aspects beyond the technical, or even the technical stuff. But yet we have a very specific view of what mentoring is and what it looks like. No, I don't think it is. Yeah. Yeah, but you also didn't tell me you were going to ask me this question. Thanks for springing it on me. Carry on talking. It's massive. It's really moving. Like, to hear that story is really moving. And then you've got people like Ian Wright, when he talked about the teacher that he had, black footballer in the UK, and he met up. Have you seen that film clip where he met up with him? It's incredible, but what I think that shows or demonstrates is what's often the case is we don't know who our mentors are. We know who. Well, of course, I know who's influencing me in my life, but actually, at the beginning of one of the talks I give, I introduce a story, and then I say to people, who has had the biggest influence in your life? Just think for a minute quietly, and I say you don't have to share, because then people will just open up more. It's for them, it's to reflect. But people do share, and the stories are so moving, but they're also often people that they hadn't realised had that impact on them. And from a scientific perspective, that's really interesting, because if we are aware and we make it conscious, both that we are being mentored and that someone is mentoring us, it has a bigger impact. So it's strange, and you said it to me, so it gave me time to think, listen to your story as well, heard it before, still moved me as much second time. But for me, I think, weirdly, I didn't really have a strong adult figure as a mentor when I was growing up. I had my brother, who's 5 years older than me. I absolutely didn't. I mean, he was almost like a role model to me as well. But if he gave me advice, I would follow it. And he would support me, and he would champion me, and he would believe in me. And, I can see that he was a child himself, and I can think that really wasn't the right thing to do or the right thing to say, but that's part of life. And then my friend Charlie, she was my friend when I was 13. She, when I was having a really hard time in life, she was the one that would make sense of things. She would listen, change the space. I felt like I could be myself with her. And it was funny because our friendship, I mean, we're still close now, but we're very, very different. We hung out with different people, we did different things. But she was like a peer mentor to me, which I'd never thought of, actually. I mean, I had thought about how much she just helped me think through. And that helping me was a lot to do with being quiet and holding space. And now we're quiet. Mm-hmm. I put that in one of my pitch decks and I was told to take it out. Yeah, and I think, reflecting on Charlotte, it wasn't that Charlie would tell me what to do. She came up with some real pearls of wisdom, which I don't know how she managed at that age, but she did. But it was also that a massive part of mentoring is providing the space for someone to think things through. And we've got this really bad perception of how we work things out in our head, and we sort of apply the methods we use in the world to fix things, and it doesn't work in our heads. It just doesn't work. And I mean, the simplest analogy for me is you're lying awake in the middle of the night, and you're thinking the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and you can't get to a solution. And then you wake up in the morning and you say it to your partner, and you're like, oh, I don't even need to say anything. Suddenly it all becomes clear. And we just process things more effectively when we say them out loud. Now that can be journaling and all those sorts of things combined, but providing someone with that space to even think through their own solutions is massively, massively powerful. Well, from a oh, it's horrible. I mean, as a teenager, I was desperately scrambling around trying to solve my own issues. And actually, I managed to dig myself into bigger and bigger holes by doing that. Because I wasn't a psychologist, I wanted to be one. But the irony is there again. I think this is where mentoring is really, really helpful, is because you can know lots of stuff. I know loads about psychology. And sometimes people say to me, oh, you must be able to do this, that, and the other. I'm like, no, just because I know about it doesn't mean I do it. And we all need someone else there to, even when we know things, translate it into doing, and then translate that into being. Okay, do you want to know about the name? Okay, so, OKA. There's something in psychology known as the transposed letter effect. And it means if you take a well-known word and you switch two of the letters around, the person will still read the original word. That's what goes through, that's what processes first, but you'll pay more attention to it. And so it's actually oak. It's about strength and wisdom. And it's saying, but you need to pay attention to that. Otherwise, it just sounds nice because it's ochre and it's three-letter word. Don't forget, transposed letter effect. Yeah. Basically, if you switch some letters around in a word that people pay more attention to it. Well, I haven't tested it from a brand perspective. And then I guess where it came from. So, well, as you know, Giles, but I have worked as a psychologist, believe it or not, with, with senior leaders for the last 20 years. And I had always wanted to help people, and it's great because you are helping people when it's leaders, but they're not the people I really actually wanted to help. I'll go a step before. I wanted to do clinical psychology, but I realised I was too screwed up to do clinical psychology. So I went off into the business world and thought, I just love people. And then I found out about this thing called organisational psychology, which basically meant doing the more positive side of psychology, the more everyday constructive, applied. And that means that maybe I could do it without it screwing me up more. So that's what I did. But it took me into a route where it's typically the leaders who are paying the money for that sort of advice and one-to-one attention on how things work. And it was amazing. I learned so much. I used to profile leaders for roles. So, for example, I might get down to the last two candidates for CEO role, and you come in, you collect information from lots of different sources, but you go in very much trying to be as unbiased as you possibly can, as a blank sheet, and then you go through their life from when they're a teenager to where they are today, and you look at what are their core drivers, what do they really value, what annoys them, what's going to derail them, how do they think, how do they work with other people, and then how does that align with where the company's trying to get to, what the team they're leading is trying to do. And it's not saying this person's right and this person's wrong. It's feeding that information back and saying, if you hire this person who's very good, you'll get X, Y, and Z. But if you hire this person, you'll get A, B, and C. And sometimes it is a case of saying don't hire them, but usually that would be the case. But all the time I was doing that, I kept thinking, I want to be sharing this with more people, because you see what a difference that fine-tuning can make to someone's life, even when they're already, inverted commas, successful. Because after the profiling, it would be a case of working with them, coaching, doing development with them on a long-term basis with some people. And I thought, I'm going to write a book, because that way I can give this information to lots of people. And I did that. And my friend who worked with disadvantaged kids in Scotland said, Fiona, or Fee, no disrespect, but none of them are going to read your book, and nor are their parents. I was like, that's a very good point. And so then I thought, well, how do I turn it into something that's more practical and tangible for the people that wouldn't pick up a book? And so I wrote a second book. You see, I don't learn. Yeah, more pictures in it. This one was about role modelling and the neuroscience behind role modelling and stories about it. So it's social and emotional learning. And when I was exploring information to put this book together, it just struck me how much we think so many of these things are obvious. They are very natural, but we just don't use them. And there's this chance to use things like role modelling and mentoring in society to have a massively positive impact, but we just don't leverage them. Anyway, that was my book. So I thought, well, I was feeling really frustrated. I was thinking, I work with charities and things, but I felt still not doing what I need to do. And an app was the next step, because even people in quite disadvantaged situations tend to have phones. And so how could we help people to help people? How could we put those tools in, but then also help people know how to use them and help them know how to guide that other person? And it's not about making people who are mentors psychologists, but it's helping them understand how to be a mentor more effectively, which then has a massively positive impact on, we know from research on different aspects of their life and their work. It can make it can make life-changing situations for people, whether they're already successful or whether they're in a situation where they didn't have a mentor or a role model. So that's the reason behind it. It's a similar path, but you get feedback and put it out and you see what works and what doesn't work. And it was actually one of the charities I work with called Future First, who work with kids in comprehensive schools across the UK, and they were going, oh, Fiona, can you help us match mentors and mentees more effectively? And I was like, okay, let me have a look into that. So I basically just did loads and loads of research on the research that's out there, and it's across all different fields, because like you imagine, it's medicine, it's business, it's education, and saying, well, how do we create the most how do we create the most optimal match? And then geeked out on that. I used to coach the UNESCO chair for data analytics, and she was like, oh, Fiona, we can help you with that. So we've created this great matching algorithm, which is based on psychological principles. And I've been told reliably by 2 academics who advise the dating apps that it's better than the dating apps. Yeah. Yeah. No, we are. We're talking about the big dating apps. Obviously, I can't name them, but I have I did a lot of had a lot of meetings with a lot of data scientists, and then it was basically them putting together what I was offering, my knowledge and experience and the psychology behind it, and then they were putting it together in a way that worked in terms of the numbers and how things fit together. So it was a lot of toing and froing to work that through, way more than I expected actually. But it's been a great outcome, and it also gives me an opportunity to think, well, where else can we put in psychology, proper psychology, behind some of these algorithms in different ways moving forward, which I do get quite excited about. Having said that, no offence to some of the data scientists, but I did dread my meetings with them sometimes. And that's nothing to do with them, it's to do with me. And, I want equations, that sort of thing. So we've got a personality test, which is based on 5-factor theory, which is the most robust. So what you do with personality, you can look at it and it can look like a quiz. Actually, we call it a quiz because it sounds eccentric. But a lot of them, they're not very predictive or reliable. So it'll change depending on your mood and things like that. The ones that are tested globally for bias, for all those sorts of things, it's mainly based on 5-factor theory. So they'll be modified and changed in terms of language and what have you. And that's what we've done. We've based it on 5-factor theory of personality. And there are some aspects that you see and you recognise, like introversion, extroversion. And we've matched it also with Jungian type. So you have a little cool character. So you're one of 12 characters, which is just a bit of fun. It doesn't play into the algorithm or anything like that. And then we also take preferences into account, and values. Values are massively important. But the thing that's interesting about the matches, it's not an exact match. So some people have said to me, oh, well, is it like you put an extrovert with an extrovert? So, well, not necessarily, because it depends on what the next scale says in how that first scale shows up. So you're kind of trying to do it, all these threads at once, and all these weightings have to be sort of intertwined, which is kind of cool from a geeky perspective, but also could send quite a lot of people to sleep. 50. And it doesn't take long, because the whole point of it is you're answering a statement, and you should be doing it by gut, because should being it'll give you the most accurate outcome. Because once you start thinking about it, we think, well, what should I put? How should I answer this? So you actually can whiz through it in 5 minutes. And then that's done, that's there, that's on your profile on the app. And you can do that without, you don't have to subscribe or pay to do that. You can go on and do that, and then you can share it on social media, which is another bit of fun. But the values and the other aspects of it are kind of behind the paywall, as they say, I think. Is that what they say? Oh. Well, it's different for the user than what's going on in the background. And one thing that's really, really important to state is your data, if you come on this, is stored anonymously. So it's only matched with you as it goes through the system to come out at your end. It's scrambled in the background, so we don't have access to, Giles has filled it in. What did he put? Oh, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. We don't do that. And over time, we will look at what we call aggregate data, which is basically looking at the patterns that come out, and that will help us to remove biases and to improve it. But we're not sort of storing individuals' data against their name and going, I now know this, that, and the other about them. So to the user, what they see is they see the little character. So I'm a dreamer. And then there's a description of that overall description, and then there's literally where you lie on 5 scales, and then you can click on those scales and you go through and you read a bit more. So for example, going back to the introversion, extroversion, I'm somewhere in between, and so I'm an ambivert. And so when I click through, it gives me a description of what an ambivert is. But what's really helpful is from writing the first book, I knew how to be really, really careful on how we phrase things, so that if someone doesn't have support when they're reading it, it's not going to send them down a rabbit hole. Because psychometrics can be incredibly damaging if they're not used in the right way. But this isn't. It's all fun and it's all positive. Just to clear that up. That's what's prattling on. It might pop back in. It's a blank moment, Giles. It's appropriate. Yeah. Or you might want to be a mentor. Yeah. Or you might want to be a peer mentor. Yeah, and they also apply to, mentor applies to coach, mentee to coachee. So if someone wants to use it, say someone is a life coach, and they want to put their own group of people on it, they can do that, and it's all secure and ring fenced. You go on and you choose the role you want to play, and you can be more than one. So you can say, I want to be a mentor, but then actually I want to be a mentor. So you can go back into the app and say, I'm going to find a mentor. But if we start with, I'm going to be a mentor, you choose that, and then it will provide you with a list of your matches, and the ones that are highest up the list are a close match to the ones that go down the list. And you click on that, you can see a bit more of their bio, a bit like you'd see on LinkedIn. Not a lot of information, but enough to kind of give you an idea what they're like. And you can filter it on location, gender, things like that. And then you request to connect with them. And at that point, that's all that happens. It goes off to be, it's a bit like a LinkedIn request. It moves from your matching column into your request column. But then if they accept it, then you connect, and that's when you start using the app to help guide both the sessions and book the sessions in the diary, take notes on the sessions, ask questions beforehand, share notes and things afterwards. But also the development plan, the type of structure that we use with senior leaders. So it's looking at a goal and then looking at the psychological elements that sit behind that goal and how you can fill them in for you. And this is the bit that's often missing with psychology. We kind of get the, yeah, I mean, I know that. Or as I say to my coaches, look, you know I don't do this, but it seems so obvious that we often just don't take that next step, which is you need to be quite rigorous of, I'm going to take this approach, I'm going to try it, and then I'm going to see if it works. If it works, then I integrate it into my life. If it doesn't, I discard it. And those are the steps that we often leave off. We kind of just go, oh yeah, I read this book and it was really good, and what are you doing with it? Well, you know, and that's one of the reasons that the book, I just realised it takes someone who's incredibly motivated to be able to take stuff from a book and actually then work it through and apply it to their own life. No, I mean, I think the only people I've seen that are good at it are the people who are elite athletes, elite in terms of leaders or academics, and really driven and really focused. But even then, they know they have to talk to someone else about it, which is why someone like me is in the room anyway, because I'm a coach. Because like, it goes back to that bedtime thing. You can sit and think about it as much as you like, but it's really difficult to then A, work it out without saying it out loud, and B, the next thing is actually applying it to your life, and then C is saying, actually, is this working or isn't it? Because, you know, it's really difficult, because some things, it's like it can feel really, really hard, but you should keep trying because it's just getting used to it. Other things can feel really, really hard, but actually they're just wrong, and you need to let go of them. How do you tell the difference? Absolutely. Because suddenly it's like, it makes more sense. Because, you know, when you say to someone, oh, I've really been struggling with X, Y, and Z, so let me think, I can't think of an example. But, you know, and you speak to someone and they'll say to you, oh, I just don't think that works for you. You know, remember when you tried this, it wasn't quite the right fit. So if I use sport as an analogy, the first step is finding something that intrinsically motivates you, because you know how hard it is to keep up a fitness regime if you don't like what you're doing. It's like almost impossible. But then we don't simply think through what I really like and how am I going to do that. But for me, I used to work with a golf pro, and I thought I should learn to play golf. Oh my God, all due respect to golfers, but I am not a golfer. It's like, I just found it so frustrating, and it just made me feel like an utter failure because I couldn't get to grips with it. Now, arguably, I could have stuck with it for longer, but I wasn't enjoying the process. Whereas snowboarding, I absolutely love, and I am so passionate about. And yet it's still hard when you start. But I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the hardness of it. I got frustrated, but the level of frustration wasn't as high. And I think all exercise is good, the same as all psychological approaches or mentoring approaches might be good, but you need to work out which ones work for you and which ones work for you in your life. Because I can't go snowboarding like every day of the week, so it's great, but I still got to think about another form of exercise to do. So it's all those different elements come together. Well, yeah, I think anyone can be a mentor. Just trying to find a Spielberg quote. There's a lovely Spielberg quote, I can't remember now. It basically says, it's not about what you think that person should be, it's about finding out what that person should be. And I think, and I've probably got that completely wrong, but basic, thank you. Make my quote then, because, yeah. But it's having someone who works out and provides space for what's best for you. And there are certain characteristics we know on personality that help with that. Which will be something we have to tackle at some point, because people may get coming up and just be like, keep not coming up on matches. But it's providing that space, it's listening, and it's guiding, it's providing that trust and just gently guiding someone so that they can come to their own answers. Oh, and the other thing, sorry, Charles, absolutely critical, and this is where youth mentoring often goes wrong, have to show up. They can't let the person down. If you can't make it, you tell that person. You don't prioritise every meeting ahead of it. If you can help it, and if you're mentoring someone young, be sure that you can stick with it, because the research shows that it actually does more damage than it does help if you start and then you drop out. And that's where we're going with it. And initially we'll do that on Facebook, because it's a natural place where you can provide that community under the Oak app. But as we progress with the technology behind the app, we'll do that in the app. Initially, you are seeing everyone like you would on a LinkedIn or a Facebook when you have a big list, and then you're also seeing your closed group. But we want to build out those features that allow people to be part of different communities, because we know, for example, that the LGBTQ plus community really, really massively benefit from mentoring. Well, in fact, any minority does. But they want to potentially feel safe within that community that they're in. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we have a contract on there, so that if people want to download that contract just for them to use with their mentee or mentor, and just say that here are the ground rules that we're agreeing to. It's nothing scary, but it just creates that agreement that, yeah, I know what you want to get out of this, and I want to get out of this, and then on each session we have like some really simple pointers, which again may seem obvious, but it doesn't mean we do them. So it's thinking about, have you booked a room somewhere quiet, where you won't be interrupted? Have you checked with that person whether they've got anything specific they want to talk about? And so just little reminders and pointers. And I think it's important, and again, I know from my own experiences, like, I know how to sort of follow best practice as a psychologist and a coach, but I still have to be reminded. And so it's not teaching people to suck eggs. It's saying, here's a little reminder. And then if they didn't know that, it's something that, I hadn't thought of that. It's a really good question, and it's a really hard one to answer. And so when you're working with leaders in business, there's one measure that we use which looks at how they solve problems. And one of the areas that, when you get to just before the most senior levels in leadership, a lot of people there will be relying on logic and fact. And doesn't mean they don't have intuition, it's just they don't feel confident in using it, they don't trust it, they think that it's not to be used in business situations. But actually, we know the very best leadership decisions are made when they are both gut and fact and logic. And so part of it is trying to train people to tune into that a bit more. And things like mindfulness, if it's done properly, like Headspace does it, are massively helpful with that, because it just gives you the space to listen to yourself. And that's not that annoying head in the middle of the night. It's not those thoughts that race round and round and round and round. Because mindfulness is actually about leaving your thoughts alone. And it's saying, what is my gut telling me? There's a really interesting podcast I was listening to, Stephen Bartlett, and I can't remember the name of the lady, but she was talking a lot about this. Let me just find it, because it might be good for people to listen to. It was Anna St. John, and she was CMO of, so Chief Marketing Officer of Netflix, Uber, and Apple. So she's taught, yeah, just a few, but it's really interesting because she's talking about her dad, George, for example, and how what he believed often wasn't what her gut was telling her. And that's when it's really, really hard. When it's someone that you want to do the right thing by them, it's really hard to separate yourself enough to be able to go, no, that's not what my gut's telling me to do here. Yeah. And there are days where, so my husband has really encouraged me to do this, and there are days where I've hated him for it. And I told him that, because I'm like, why did you make me do this? He's like, I didn't make you do it. Yes, you did. It has been tough because well, for a start, I've had teams of people working with me on projects, but they're all tend to be very experienced psychologists. So I haven't really had to manage or lead or anything. And suddenly you've got some quite young developers who you're having to think through how you're saying what you're saying and what that means. And the investment piece has just been, I hated it. And it's such a catch-22, because it's, I want to help women minorities, but women only get 2% of women founders only get 2% of venture capital money, and that is a figure from this year. It's not like an old figure. And so, and on the surface of it, all the VCs will now say, women, minorities, blah blah blah, but it's not what they're still doing in terms of their decision making, because they're unaware of the biases that come into it. And so sometimes it feels like you're banging your head against the wall, and other times it feels like it's the most exciting thing in the world, and wow, I'm going to help all these people, it's going to be amazing. So yeah, it's a roller coaster. But I tell you, the one thing you say, have I learned a lot? It's some weeks there is so much that I'm learning. I don't go, oh, isn't this wonderful? I've learned all these things. I just feel so out of control, and I feel like I completely lack any competence in anything that I'm doing. So yeah, that's not fun. Oh, look at you, turning the tables. It's an interesting one. I think there might be an element of that and an element of underconfidence, which sort of ties into it as well. But I think there's also a thing like when you've gone through life and you've become expert in certain things, it's really destabilizing to then be a complete novice, And when you're doing things like pitching to venture capital firms, you're pitching someone in their early 20s because they're the gatekeepers at the first step. And you sit there thinking, but I've got all this experience. You can't say that. Just sit there and go through the process like everyone else, which is good. It's good for you. It's quite, not for you, it's good for me. It's quite humbling. Oh, I feel scared all the time. No. Well, that's probably not entirely true. And I think that's the thing that's really hard to work out. It's like, so, the comfort zone model. So you've got the comfort zone, stretch zone, and the injury zone. So if you're looking at it in sport, it's like, if you don't train in your stretch zone, you're just going to get better. But you need to be careful not to overtrain and go into your injury zone. But when it comes to our head, it's really hard to distinguish which are the things that are a good discomfort and they're going to help us to grow, and which are the things that are very bad discomfort and we just need to leave them and move on. And that's why mentors are brilliant. Should? Nah, we don't do shoulds. Well, currently, obviously it depends when you're listening, but if you're listening in the next few weeks, which is October 2023, you can go on to ochre.life, which is the website, and there's a wait list there, so you can put your name in for the wait list, and that doesn't sign you up to anything obligatory, but it means that when we have the app out, you'll be one of the first people on it using it. We've used it with test groups and stuff, but you'd be the first sort of real life groups. And then look at the community on Facebook as it launches. Hopefully people start asking questions in there, and I'll try and answer them if they're psychology related, but I can also ask my colleagues because I don't know the answers. So it might be that someone comes up with something and I'm like, I don't know, but let me go away and ask this group of people, and because I have access to that group of people, I can share that information. And then we've got all the social media handles, so we'll be putting out bits and pieces. But initially, the things people can go on it, try it for free, and look at their personality and think, do I actually want to subscribe or not? And even if you subscribe, you don't have to accept anyone's invite if they ask you to be their mentor, or you can just like you would on any other platform, you can just decline politely. And it's a bit of fun. And you know what? One of the first groups that used it, they are an organisation that do a lot of work with organisations on development, so human development. So they know a lot of this stuff already. But one of the pieces of feedback was, well, it was consistent with other personality tests I've done. And I'm like, well, good. It should be, because that means it's working. It's like, that's how it should be coming out. So if you have done something somewhere else, you didn't expect to see something massively different, it should resonate though. And if it doesn't sound like you, for anyone, you tell me, email me, tell me, because there might be something that needs to be fixed. Not you, I mean the app. I love talking to you. Well, I'm massively excited because you're helping me with it as well. Los Angeles, yeah. Oh no, no. I don't think I fit the mould of Silicon Valley. No, I'm in a really lovely neighbourhood. My next door neighbour too is a Scotsman who's a composer. Lots of really interesting creative people. That's just one example. So Blair, I've just given you a shout out on this podcast. Thank you so much, Giles. So good to talk to you.